Yeah, we were talking about attributes. Then we also talked about generalized entity, generalizability in brief. We're going to cover it in detail again. But then we also talked about relationships, right? How to relate to entities. We use relationships for that. Now let's see all the notations that we are going to use. So strong entity, we represent it using a rectangle. Weak entity is represented using a double rectangle. What is a weak entity? Weak entity, what is a weak entity? An entity which does not have a primary key.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, an entity which does not have a primary key, that means every attribute is having repetitions, or in every attribute you are having null values. That means it is difficult to identify the records of that table, right? Using an attribute or group of attributes together. That means another way of defining a weak entity is it cannot exist in its own, right? It cannot exist on its own. It needs the help of some other entity set to identify the records within it, right?
Yes, ma'am. It will require an entity set, not
Ye-
an attribute.
yes. It records, needs the help of another entity set to identify the records within it. Why does it need the help of another entity set? To identify the records within it. Why? Because independently we cannot identify the records within it uniquely. There are a lot of repetitions. An example is what? Example is uh, loan. There are different loans, and what do you say? Yeah, you are of let's say for different clients you are given different loans. So in the loan table you will have different loan numbers, right? You will have different dates, you will have different transaction IDs, but there will be multiple transactions on any particular day, right? Particular person can have different multiple loans. Particular person or various people may have loans on the same day, so it's difficult to identify the records for in a loan table. So when I want to identify that for a particular person, which are the loan records which are linked to it, what will I do? Think about this.
So, if we want to search for a loan, we will check. Will have a person entity. We will check how much is the loan amount.
Now, loan
It will take.
amount is fine, but see, this is a payment table. Okay, this is a weak entity example. Now, it has three attributes: payment number, payment date, payment amount. Okay, now in this table, you imagine there will be multiple records. There will be multiple payment numbers, multiple payment dates, multiple payment amounts. Can it happen that on the same day there were two payments that happened? Okay, on the same day two payments happened which had same payment number and same amount.
My payment number can't be same. No. Yes, payment number. By payment number you mean transaction ID?
Yes.
Yeah, payment number cannot be same. Payment date and amount could be same.
See,
So
if
payment number.
if you had unique payment number in the entire table, then it would have been a primary key. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So if I am
Yes, ma'am.
saying it is a weak entity, that means this is not a primary key, right? See, if you see the notation here, this is a dotted line.
Yes, ma'am.
This is not for the primary key, you have a straight bold line like this. I'll show you here, like this.
Yes, ma'am.
Here, what do you see? A dotted line. Dotted line means what? This is not the primary key, this is a discriminator. What
Yes,
is a discriminator?
I had studied, I forgot.
So discriminator is actually an attribute which is helping you to identify a subset of records here, but it cannot act as a primary key. Okay, so I'll give you an example. It may happen that for a particular date and for a particular amount there are unique payment numbers.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but if I see the table in itself, if I see the table in itself, like if I see all the records of that table, the payment number may get repeated. That is why it is not a primary key.
And payment number can't be repeated, no?
No, if the payment number was not getting repeated, then it would have been a primary key.
Yes, ma'am.
It is not a primary key, that means payment number is getting repeated, na?
Yes, ma'am.
So payment number is getting repeated, but for a particular payment number, if you see, there is a unique date and amount.
Yes, ma'am.
It may happen that there is a repetition of payment number on some other date.
Yes, yes,
है
yes.
ना? So that is why it is acting as a discriminator. It cannot act as a primary key. How it is acting? Why is it called a discriminator? Because it is at least helping us to identify from a subset of records. Right? It is acting as a key for a subset of records. Which are those subset of records for a particular date and amount? Yeah.
So, where is a weak entity? Payment is a weak entity
Yes, payment is a weak entity
because
because payment number is getting repeated in the table.
okay, so when a table doesn't have a primary key, the table becomes a weak entity.
Yes.
Okay, ma'am.
See
So,
the
but
definition
a
of the
table is
weak
not,
entity.
but table is useless without a primary key.
An entity, no, table is not useless. A table is a weak entity. It is still not useless. Why? Because it is capturing some information. Data is of utmost importance today. So when you have some data, let's say you don't have primary key, no problem. We'll figure out some solution. Okay, but it is not useless. It is a weak entity. So see the definition of weak entity set, an entity set that does not have a primary key. Okay, entity set that does not have a primary key. I'm not giving you bookish definitions. I'm giving you definitions which help you to give you some key elements so that you can understand, you can remember these concepts. You can
And what made
differentiate.
payment number discriminator?
Hmm?
And what made payment number discriminator and what is discriminator? Could you please?
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. So an entity set that does not have a primary key is a weak entity set. All the attributes of the table do not fully depend on the single attribute. This is the bookish definition that you can see. Okay, another way of saying the above statement. Okay, this can come as an option in your MCQ, and this is also definition of a weak entity set. When all the attributes of the table do not fully depend on a single attribute, or there is no attribute in the table that can distinctly identify all the records. Why was it difficult to distinctly identify all the records? Because there was some repetition happening. There was some repetition of values happening in the table. That is why we did not have a primary key. Coming to the discriminator. Now discriminator is also called a partial key. So what is the solution in this context? We may, important thing is I am saying we may have an attribute which acts as a partial key or a discriminator. Now what is a discriminator? In this case, as you can see, payment number was getting repeated, okay, but for a particular date it was not getting repeated. It was getting repeated for consecutive days, let's say. But if I need to identify all the transactions in a particular date, all the transactions uniquely, if I want to identify on a particular date, I can use payment number as the differentiator, as the discriminator, or as the partial key.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so that is how it like qualified to be a partial key or a discriminator.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
now what is a discriminator in detail if we want to study? So a weak entity set does not have a primary key, but we need a means of distinguishing between all the entries in the weak entity set that depend or are linked to a strong entity. Now you said if we don't have a primary key for an entity, then it becomes waste. No, it is not useless, because we always has a strong entity to help it to identify the records there. To help a weak entity, we always have a strong entity. Okay, so a strong entity will always come there. So, but a strong entity, okay, a strong entity will have its primary key, but it will take some help from the weak entity also there. So, when a strong entity comes to a weak entity, it sees the discriminator there. So, the discriminator of the weak entity set is a set of attributes that allows distinction or identification to be made, but for a subset of records only, not for complete set of records. Now take this example of loan and payment. This is the complete example. If you understand this, try to understand all the things I am telling you here. If you understand this, everything will be clear. Okay. This loan over here is a strong entity. Loan number and the amount, they are the attributes for the loan entity. Okay. Now loan number is a primary key. Amount, normal attribute, there is no underline over here. Okay. Payment is a weak entity. Payment number, payment date, payment amount. Okay. Payment numbers are getting repeated. Okay. But for a specific loan, there will be no repetitions of payment number. Okay. That is how this loan is linked to the payment. Yeah. So all the payments will be made for a particular loan, right? If a person takes loan, he has to settle the loan by making certain payments.
Yes, ma'am.
So when I'll be storing the records for various loans and payments, I will make sure that for a particular loan, the payment number does not get repeated.
Yes, ma'am. But it will get repeated on different days.
On different days, yes. But for those days, I will make sure that still, when I see what I'm doing over here, I'm writing a relationship over here, right? I'm connecting these two entities. I'm connecting the loan entity with the payment entity, and I am making this relationship, which is a double diamond, which is known as identifying relationship. Now this is a special relationship. Why is it called identifying relationship? Because it helps in providing identity to the weak entity. Okay, it provides identity to weak entity. How it provides identity? Now payment number was getting repeated. We were not able to differentiate all the records. So what did we do? We combined the loan number with the payment number. This loan payment relationship is going to have two attributes. First, the primary key of the strong entity set. Second, the discriminator of the weak entity set. This is a very important thing, and it has come as gate question in previous year questions. That when you connect a strong entity set and a weak entity set, what does the relationship comprise of? So the relationship comprises of the primary key of the strong entity set and the partial key or the discriminator of the weak entity set. Okay, very important point to remember.
That is called
Identifying relationship.
Okay, loan number and payment number together are known as identifying relationship. Okay.
That is the identifying relationship, all the relationship between this loan and payment. Okay.
But what is the use of identifying relationship?
Yes, I'm coming to that. See, what was the problem here? You were not able to uniquely identify the records, all the records in this table. Okay. So we come up with discriminator, which is a partial key. Okay. What is happening in case of discriminator? That okay, payment number is getting repeated, but yes, for a particular date we saw that the payment number is not getting repeated. On a single day, the payment number does not repeat. On the next day, the payment number repeated. Okay, fine. But still we are not able to identify all the records nicely, right? So what happened was we gave this constraint. Whenever you write a relationship or whenever you write a key, what do? You put a constraint, right? What is the constraint that you put? That okay, for a particular loan number, you will like for a particular loan number, you will not have repeated payment numbers. Payment numbers will repeat, but they will repeat for some other loan number. Let's say loan number 1 is having payment numbers A to Z. Then loan number 2 can also have payment numbers A to Z. But if you imagine this table, it will have multiple A to Z entries, right?
Yes, ma'am. But loan number when loan number and payment number are added, it could be same for the different days.
But here we are not capturing the date, na? Here we are giving an additional identification. When we have this constraint that this payment number will always be unique for loan number, we now do not need the payment date.
Yes, ma'am.
If I just want to filter out the payments made for a particular loan, I will just take this loan number, payment number mapping now.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Now you don't need payment date amount constraint. That was only required to identify the discriminator within the table. This is external help that we are getting.
But to identify a loan, we can do using payment number just.
To identify loan, you can simply identify it using the primary key, loan number.
Yes, ma'am.
To identify loan, you don't need to go to payment table.
Yes, ma'am.
Loan is a strong entity set. Issue was in identifying payments. That is why we linked them with the loan the person has taken.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Since loan number was unique, I had to connect in some manner this loan number with the payment number. So the constraint over here was that all the payments made corresponding to this loan number, I will keep the record of this. Right? What is this? This is a relationship which is telling me that when I will implement this, I will always keep the record of what are the payment numbers corresponding to this loan number.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, are you getting me?
Like if we remove loan number and try to from payment number, if we try to locate all the payments, we would mix up with other users loan amount.
Yes. Also for two different loan amounts that a particular user has issued from the bank. You will not be able to identify the payments linked to two different loan amounts issued by a particular user.
Okay,
You needed some identification for that to link it with a particular loan.
Yes, ma'am. Now got it. Now it's perfect.
Okay. So coming to some important things here. Yeah. Strong entity set is also known as the dominant entity set. Okay. Question can come. All these words you need to remember. Dominant entity set. Why? Because it is an entity set which is having its independent existence. It does not need any other entity set. Right? Each payment is only for a single loan. In this context, if you see this diagram, let me also tell you about cardinality and participation here. I've included the text and everything, but here what you see, when you see this kind of diagram, the labels over here, 1 is to M, M is to N, these refer to cardinalities. Okay, cardinality means that in what number are these two entries participating with each other. Okay, I'll give you an example. 1 is over here that and M is over here. That means for one loan you can have multiple payments. Okay, and which is also true in our original context. In real life also, in order to settle a loan you can make multiple payments.
Yes, ma'am.
But one payment cannot be issued for two different loans. You cannot say that okay, this payment is for this loan also and this loan also. Does it happen in real life?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, one payment will only be linked with a particular loan, right? If you are making a certain payment, you will also always specify that this is to settle which loan, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is why it is singular over here and multiple over here. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
This is cardinality. Then come to participation. You see here it is double lined. Here it is single lined with an arrow. Whenever it is single lined with an arrow, it says partial participation. Whenever it is double lined, it says total participation. Okay. Now total participation, why? Because this weak entry set, always remember, whenever there is a weak entry set, you will always have a total participation line there. Why? Because this entry set, it cannot exist independently. It needs to totally participate into this relationship to gain its identity. Think in the real life scenario or the example that we just now discussed. You cannot say that okay, some of the payment numbers are linked with the loan number, but some payment numbers do not have any loan number to them, right? That means that is an error there. You don't know which those payments have been made for which loans, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you need to have a total thing over here, but there can exist some loans for which no payments have been made till now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that means here you don't need to have total participation. Okay.
Could you explain this once again?
Yeah. So you cannot say that a payment record is existing, but you don't know for which loan that payment has been made.
Sorry, ma'am.
You cannot say that a payment record is existing, but you don't know for which loan that payment has been made.
Yes, ma'am.
But you can always say that there is a loan for which no payment has been made.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that is why this cannot exist without loan ID attached to it. So it has to have a total participation here. Okay,
Yes,
but a loan can exist without a payment ID because no payment has been made in that case. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I got it.
Yeah. So that is an important thing over here. That is why there is total participation here and single line participation. But in general, you can always remember that whenever there is a weak entity set in this side, you will always have a total participation. Okay. This side, you will always have total participation. This side, you can have partial or total depending upon the scenario. Here, we needed a partial participation. If there was a constraint that okay, in loan table, there is no loan. Let's say in the question you get in this manner, there is no loan for which no payment has been made, or there is every loan has at least one payment made to it, then there would have been a total participation here. Okay.